Rock fans were stunned when Rush reportedly sounded terrible during a reunion rehearsal. What went wrong when legends like Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson tried to bring the magic back without Neil Peart? The truth behind that rehearsal might surprise every Rush fan. Rush has always carried a reputation that borders on legendary. For decades, the band built a legacy defined by precision, musicianship, and a level of tight performance that many fans believed was almost impossible to replicate. When people think about the trio, they imagine the unmistakable voice and bass work of Geddy Lee, the soaring guitar tone of Alex Lifeson, and the intricate rhythmic brilliance of Neil Peart. Together they created a sound that shaped progressive rock for generations. That is why whispers about a reunion rehearsal that sounded terrible immediately grabbed attention across the rock world. Fans who spent years believing the band could do no wrong suddenly found themselves asking a surprising question. What actually happened in that rehearsal room? Geddy Lee walked into the rehearsal space carrying more than just his bass guitar. He carried decades of history, memories of sold-out arenas, and the emotional weight of performing songs that had defined his entire life. Alex Lifeson was there too, greeting old friends, adjusting pedals, and trying to recreate the same chemistry that once came naturally. But something about the atmosphere was different. Time had passed. The world had changed. And most importantly, the presence of Neil Peart, whose drumming had always been the thunder behind the band's lightning, was no longer there. The first notes rang out awkwardly. Not disastrous, not catastrophic, but undeniably rough around the edges. For a band once known for machine-like precision, even a slight stumble felt shocking. Geddy hit a vocal line slightly off from the rhythm he remembered. Alex responded with a guitar phrase that felt just a little late. The room fell quiet for a moment after the song ended. Nobody laughed. Nobody celebrated. The silence itself said everything. Alex Lifeson reportedly broke the tension with a half-joking comment that the band sounded like a garage group trying to cover Rush songs instead of the actual creators of those songs. It was meant to lighten the mood, but it also carried a strange truth. When musicians step away from performing together for years, the invisible connection that once guided every beat and every transition can fade. Even legends are not immune to that reality. But the deeper issue was emotional rather than technical. Neil Peart had always been the heartbeat of the band, both literally and creatively. His drumming was not just about keeping time. It was about storytelling through rhythm. Without him sitting behind the kit, every familiar song suddenly felt slightly incomplete. The musicians could play the notes, but the spirit that once drove those songs forward was harder to summon. Geddy Lee later reflected on moments like these, describing how strange it felt to revisit music that had once defined their identity. The riffs of songs like Tom Sawyer or Limelight carried memories of touring buses, late-night writing sessions, and roaring crowds. Trying to perform them again without the same circumstances was almost like opening a time capsule that refused to fully come back to life. Still, the rehearsal continued. Musicians are stubborn by nature. They repeated sections, adjusted tempos, and experimented with different approaches. Sometimes a song would suddenly click for a few seconds, sounding almost exactly like it did decades ago. Those brief flashes reminded everyone why Rush had been so powerful in the first place. But then the momentum would slip again, and the band would return to searching for the right groove. Observers who heard about the rehearsal later described the moment as both humbling and fascinating. The idea that Rush could sound imperfect felt shocking, yet it also revealed something deeply human about legendary artists. Behind the platinum records and massive tours are simply musicians trying to reconnect with music that once defined their lives. Alex Lifeson reportedly spent extra time experimenting with guitar tones, trying to recreate the familiar warmth and brightness that fans associate with classic Rush records. Geddy Lee focused on tightening the rhythm sections, locking his bass lines with whatever percussion was filling in for the absent Neil Peart. Slowly the room began to feel less tense. The band was not perfect, but they were beginning to find pieces of the old chemistry again. Yet even during those improvements, one realization lingered in the air. Rush had never been just a collection of talented individuals. It had always been a delicate balance between three musicians whose instincts complemented each other in extraordinary ways. Remove one piece of that triangle, and the structure naturally changes. That is why the phrase "sounded terrible" may actually be misleading. The rehearsal was not terrible in the sense of musicians failing to play. It was terrible only when measured against the impossibly high standard Rush had created for themselves. For any other band, the same rehearsal might have sounded impressive. For Rush, it simply sounded unfamiliar. By the end of the session, exhaustion mixed with reflection. Geddy leaned back in his chair, staring at the instruments scattered around the room. Alex rested his guitar against an amplifier and quietly shook his head with a small smile. They both knew that what they had experienced was more than just a rehearsal. It was a confrontation with time, memory, and the legacy of a band that had shaped rock history. And perhaps that was the most powerful moment of all. Because even when Rush sounded imperfect, the music still carried the echoes of something extraordinary. When the conversation about that rehearsal began spreading among rock fans, reactions were intense. Some people were shocked to hear that Rush could ever sound rough. Others found the story strangely comforting, because it revealed that even legendary musicians experience uncertainty when revisiting their past. The truth behind the rehearsal was far more emotional than the headline suggested. Geddy Lee has often spoken about how deeply connected he feels to the music Rush created. Each song represents a moment in time, a chapter in the band's evolution. When he sings those lyrics again, memories flood back instantly. He remembers the energy of recording sessions, the arguments over arrangements, the excitement of discovering a riff that felt completely new. Rehearsing those songs years later can feel like walking through a hallway filled with ghosts. Alex Lifeson experienced something similar during that reunion rehearsal. His guitar work in Rush was never just about flashy solos. It was about atmosphere, emotion, and color. When he stepped on a pedal to recreate a classic tone, he was not just adjusting sound frequencies. He was trying to reconnect with a version of himself from decades earlier. That is a complicated challenge for any artist. But the biggest presence in the room was the absence of Neil Peart. Peart's drumming had always been the structural backbone of Rush's music. His ability to combine technical complexity with powerful storytelling rhythms made him one of the most respected drummers in rock history. Without him, every familiar song suddenly felt like a puzzle missing its central piece. During the rehearsal, substitute percussion attempted to follow the intricate patterns that Peart once delivered effortlessly. The beats were accurate enough, but the feel was different. Neil Peart did not simply play drums. He shaped the emotional momentum of every song. When a chorus exploded with energy or a bridge shifted into a different rhythm, it was usually Peart, guiding the transformation. That is why certain moments during the rehearsal reportedly felt strange. A song might begin strongly, with Geddy's bass locking into the groove, and Alex's guitar slicing through the room with classic Rush clarity. But then a complex transition would arrive, and suddenly the band would hesitate for a fraction of a second. That hesitation was enough to remind everyone how unique the original lineup truly was. Yet something remarkable happened as the rehearsal continued. Instead of becoming frustrated, the musicians began sharing stories. They talked about old tours, backstage moments, and the countless hours they had spent perfecting songs that fans now consider timeless. Laughter slowly replaced tension. The rehearsal transformed from a technical exercise into something more meaningful. Geddy Lee reportedly described one particular moment when the band started playing a familiar riff, almost by accident. Within seconds, Alex Lifeson joined in, adding harmonics and subtle bends that immediately sounded like classic Rush. The room suddenly felt alive again. For a brief moment, it was as if decades had disappeared. but that magic could not last forever. The song drifted apart after a few minutes, and the musicians stopped playing. Instead of disappointment, there was a quiet sense of appreciation. They had just glimpsed a fragment of what Rush once was. Fans often imagine legendary bands as unstoppable forces that can instantly recreate their past. The truth is far more complex. Music is deeply connected to time, place, and emotion. When those elements change, the performance naturally changes too. That does not mean the music has lost its power. It simply means the story behind it has evolved. Alex Lifeson later suggested that the rehearsal was never meant to prove anything. It was simply an exploration, a way of revisiting songs that shaped their lives. Whether the band sounded perfect or imperfect did not really matter. What mattered was the experience of reconnecting with the music. Interestingly, some insiders who heard fragments of the rehearsal said that even the rough moments carried a special energy. The imperfections revealed the raw musicianship that had always existed beneath Rush's polished recordings. In a strange way, hearing the band struggle slightly made their legacy feel even more authentic. The phrase "sounded terrible" eventually became more of a dramatic headline than an accurate description. What actually happened was a group of legendary musicians confronting the passage of time while honoring the memory of a bandmate who could never truly be replaced. For Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson, that realization may have been the most powerful part of the entire experience. Rush was never just about flawless performances. It was about friendship, creativity, and the relentless pursuit of musical exploration. And in that rehearsal room, surrounded by amplifiers, guitars, and decades of memories, the spirit of Rush was still there. Not perfect, not identical to the past, but undeniably alive.